I've worked for 15 years in the nuclear industry, managing projects, nuclear valve and pump manufacturing projects. I don't totally, identify with my human work, but I guess that's how we're supposed to introduce ourselves in our society. I think it's more important to speak to who we really are, which is something far greater than the human. So in my case, I live in Pennsylvania. I lived in China for a while, just kind of a normal guy. But recently, in the last couple of years, I felt called to share some pre-birth memory that had returned to me in my early 30s. I'm 40 now. And when I was a young child, before the age of 5 or 6, I had clear memory of my time before I was physical, before I was this human character. And I thought everybody did, and nobody talked about it. So I didn't talk about it. But I used to draw upon that memory very commonly as a small child and kind of cheat a little bit, because I'd seen ahead of time what my life would be like. So I was kind of like always peeking around the curtain to get an idea of what to expect. But that memory left me at about the age of 6 or so, 6 or 7 for sure. And so I had no memory of that at all for most of my adult life. I grew up with kind of a standard, environment, and I learned what I was taught and all the rest of that. And so then my 20s, I went through a traumatic experience, which I had signed up for before I had come. And so I went through that experience, and I did a lot of healing from that traumatic experience. And then at the age of 30, I began a long-term meditation practice. And much to my surprise, I began to have non-physical experiences, out-of-body experiences. And I also began to have this memory return to me of choosing to come, and my time immediately preceding this life. And when those memories returned, it was like, oh my gosh, like this is the most natural thing in the world. How did I ever forget this? Like, it's just like right there. But I'd forgotten, because I've been so physically focused, so tied into all the labels and all the identity and all the rest. So I felt actually for some number of years that I shouldn't speak about it. I felt like the timing just was not right. But a couple of years ago, I felt, okay, the time is right. There's enough people ready now that we can talk about this. And so I did share. I shared with Mira Kelly, who is a wonderful woman. And I shared in a couple other places. And it's gotten an amazing response. I've met amazing people. Like almost every day I'm meeting new people. And it's just been an amazing process. So I'll share. And anybody, please do interrupt. Any thoughts or questions or ideas? This conversation is fluid. Everyone here is a master in their own right. So we're all in dialogue with one another. So I'm just gonna recount my experience, and then anybody who wishes to interject, please do so. Okay, so before I start, I just gotta say that this kind of stuff is like impossible to talk about. Who we truly are is beyond form. We are non-physical being. We are consciousness itself, non-physical, and within the non-physical arises the world of form, arises things, objects, experiences, and words. And words then can't speak to that higher nature because they are form themselves. They're symbols. There's no words I can just say that could possibly even remotely touch the other side or these experiences. I just have to make that really big disclaimer to start. Okay, so that being said, I remember a very long time ago, and again, these experiences okay, so they have a sequence. These experiences have a sequence, but they also are kind of happening all at once. Even now, I feel like these memories are happening now. They're not so much they are in the past, and yet they're simultaneously now. I don't know how to describe that, but so my earliest memory is before I had ever been physical, coming across a being who had been physical, a very powerful, beautiful being. And I was completely overwhelmed by the quality of his nature, by who he was. He was just so beautiful and full of joy and power, so much potential and amazingness. And I was amazed by the quality of his nature, his essence. And I asked him, and again, this is telepathic because there's, it's on the other side. Oh my goodness, how did you do this? Like, look at what you are. And he shared with me that he had been physical, and he shared with me specifically one life that he had, that he had suffered with a very difficult physical ailment. I don't know what it was, but some kind of pain or long-term suffering. And the way that he met that experience was incredibly powerful. And he expanded in an incredible way because of this experience. And I asked him, were you healed all the way? Like, 'cause I saw how like damaged he had been. And he shared with me like, yes. And I kind of sensed like the depth of like this, this damage of being physical that he had experienced, and how he had healed all of it, and this amazing expansion that had taken place within him. And I said, I want to do that. I want to do that. I'm going to do that. And I was so like, I was fired up. I was like totally like committed. And he didn't like quite brush me off, but it was a little bit of like, yeah, that's what they all say. And I was like, no, I'm serious. I want to do that. I'm going to do that. I want to go do that. I want to have that experience. I want to be physical. And he said, well, go talk to your guides. So I did. And that was a long time ago, because since then I had many physical lives. And I went back and found him later and showed him, not showed him, but had a converse with him and kind of shared with him, okay, see, I'm on the path. I said I was going to do this, and here I'm doing this. Okay, so now I'm going to jump a bit, because there's a lot, but okay, so now I'm going to jump to a bit that's somewhat immediately preceding this life, where I had taken a long break. Okay, I had lived many experiences, and I took a long break. I just decided I was done for a while. I was just not doing a physical thing for a while. I was taking a long break, and I remember this guide coming to me repeatedly over and over, like, are you ready to go back yet? Are you ready to go back yet? Basically like reminding me of my own intention and just trying to kind of nudge me back onto the path. And I put him off for a while, and eventually I said, okay, I'm ready to go back. And I remember reviewing with him the state of who I was, like what I had done, what I had been, and like all these, this is really hard to, it's really hard to describe. All this stuff's like impossible to describe, but the qualities of what I had been and who I was. And the thing that I needed to work on was obvious. The thing that, and I hate to put it that way, it's not really work on, but I could tell that I had like, it was just very obvious. Like if you look at like a, I don't know, like a report or something, like the one thing like I really needed to work on it was like glaring. I was like, oh yeah, I really need to do that. And it involved a fear that I had experienced in one specific life, that in that life, the fear was so profound and so powerful that it drove me to be a very nasty person. I was a very non-helpful person. I damaged many other people. I mean, I say damage, you can't truly, the soul can't truly be damaged. We can't be damaged. But in the life, I had caused a lot of damage because of this fear, and I ended up dying in a very painful, agonizing way. And so I was surprised at how incredibly deep that fear had been for me, how deep that fear that was in me. And so I wanted to re-engage that fear. And as I reviewed this, I knew oh my gosh, the incredible amount of expansion that would be possible if I could do this, if I can meet this fear and integrate this certain energy to this degree. I just knew it would be unspeakably beautiful and powerful if I could do that. But it was, but even then I could see the vibrational distance was so extreme that I remember asking the guy, is it even possible? Like, has any other being in creation ever done this? Has any other being ever done something this extreme in this kind of way? And he said yes. And there's like this encouraging, like, and you have all time to do so. Like there's no hurry. So I knew, and this sounds kind of, as a human, this sounds kind of alien to me, but at the time I just knew with complete confidence, if it can be done, I will do it. If it can be done, I will do it. I knew that I had that ability. So with that being said, they brought me a life that was really perfect for this intention of mine. And so I reviewed this life, and it was perfect. It was like almost as good as they get. And I accepted the life, and I accepted the veil. Okay, so the veil of forgetfulness, this process of incarnating, is what I remember the most out of all of this. And that process is very abrupt and shocking. So in this life, I accepted the veil, The veil came over me, and then I was in the womb. But, okay, so when the veil came over me, I felt my knowing be cut off. I felt my vibration plummet from great heights down to the lower and lower, and go lower still, and then lower some more, and keep going lower and lower. And then you finally get there. And when you're there, it's so low, it's ridiculous, and you're cut off. I mean, at least for me, I felt cut off, and I felt like I didn't have that connectedness with other people anymore, other beings anymore. I didn't have my knowing anymore, and it was terrifying. And I wasn't even born yet. I was just in the womb, and I was terrified. And I was only there for a very, very short time. And I said, you know what? I'm not doing this. This is not happening. I mean, this is so ridiculous. This is so low vibration. This is so dark. I am not doing this. And I summoned my might, and I smote the veil. I fought my way out, and I succeeded in doing that. And so I was on the other side again, but I had killed the fetus. I had killed the body that was to be mine. And you know, thinking about it now, even I feel responsible for that. I feel sadness, because when I got to the other side, I had a life review. Even for that very short life, I had a life review, and I remember seeing the mother and all the hundreds of other people that would be negatively impacted. Well, I could feel how I negatively impacted the mother. I heaped more difficulty on her through the sorrow of her loss. And also hundreds of other people then that their lives would be made more difficult because I had made the mother's life more difficult. And I couldn't believe. I was like, well, I mean, it's really hard to describe, but I went in with great intentions. Like, I had all these good intentions. I had this big plan, you know, and then and then my fear was so great that right at the beginning, I caused that. And not only did I not succeed in my intention, but I caused the game to be more difficult for the players that I so loved and respected. That was how I'm using metaphors now. It's not quite like that, but so I was disappointed. I mean, I knew everything was okay. Everything is on the other side. You know, everything is well. It's okay. But I was disappointed that I had let that happen. So I decided to, before I attempted this again, because I knew I would want to try again. Before I did that, I practiced accepting the veil, because I didn't want to have that. I didn't want to do that same thing again. So I remember going to this place that can only be described as, like, I don't know, a veil acceptance simulator room. It was like a place you go where you practice surrendering to the veil and having your knowing cut off, and feeling separate and dark and alone. And it's kind of like diving into a pool, and then seeing how long you can stay underwater, but because this is just a trainer, you can jump back out if you get too scared, you know. But you practice. And I remember practicing, and basically it had to do with my willingness to feel the fear, and my willingness to allow and not resist. So after doing that, they brought me this life. And this life was not as optimal as the first one would have been. It was still good. It was quite good. But each life is only so good because the soul, the spirit, is rather complex in what makes it up. And in my case, I just knew I had many qualities, and there's a certain type of my nature, and that nature has to like interface with the life somehow, and then that has to work within the context of what you're trying to do, what you want to do. And this life was pretty good. You know, it wasn't perfect, but it was good. It was good. So I remember reviewing this life in great detail, and reviewing what I can only describe as a vast flow chart, or like a tree of all the things that might or could or would happen in this life. And it started like, kind of like, if you imagine a tree like tipped on its side, like thicker trunk, and then like it went out to branches, and there's all these some paths were very likely, some paths were a lot less likely. But it wasn't about events. Well, there were definitely events in it, but it wasn't so much about events as how it would feel, how it would be to be that. Like, how will it be to be that person in these different possible avenues of how this life might unfold? And I went through millions of possibilities all within the blink of an eye. It was easy to do that. I remember reviewing just tons of huge amounts of information all at once. And I knew, even then, that it was very likely that I would experience a trauma in my 20s that would crush me, and that would help facilitate my opportunity to re-experience this fear that I wanted to re-experience and integrate. So I was super excited to do this, to accept this, even though I knew it would be hard. I knew that this body, had certain limitations that other bodies do not, and that this body would be difficult in a certain ways on a day-to-day level that would like challenge my ego or something. It would make it difficult for me in a way that I would be forced to turn inward, and I would have to find strength. And also I wouldn't be, because I had, it's hard to explain, but I had a sense that it would be challenging enough to the ego that I would have to, I wouldn't be able to go totally down the ego path because it would be too challenging. So anyway, I reviewed all this, and I remember there having to be a moment to accept, and I don't remember that moment, but I do remember after that waiting for this to start the life. And I remember being in this state where I was still timeless, and it was wonderful. And I remember this light, this powerful light. And then I remember the guide coming to me and being like, all of a sudden, and not rude, but almost rude, like, now, go now, you have to go now, right now, you know, like getting my attention, like super like, now, buddy. And so I was like, okay, now. So then the next thing is I was at these beings that I can only describe as tinkerers or technicians, these beings who they're like technical in nature, and they helped apply the veil to me. So they do this, I don't know how to describe it. There's this thing like the spirit has certain nature and qualities, and the life has something going on in the body, and they have to like do this thing where it like, I don't know, they make everything fit somehow. So they were doing that, and they asked me one more time, are you sure? And I knew that this was the point of no return. And if I said yes to here, I was in for the ride. I was strapped in. And I remember saying yes. And then the veil coming over me again. And okay, so this time my intention was, okay, just don't fight it. just let go, don't resist, just allow. And I remember, okay, so like this drop in vibration is meaningful to explain, but if you, I don't know, just as a metaphor, but if you imagine like an amp that produces a pitch, like, you know, and then you have a dial and you turn it down, and it turns down. Well, it turned all the way down, and then turn down more and more and more and more and more and more, and keep cranking it down, and, you know, keep going. And that's how it felt in the vibration of the being coming down into this super dense, super tight, super cut off, you know, like going to the vacuum of space, I think is a good metaphor I like to use. It's like you go to a place where there's just no heat and no air. There's just empty space. That's how it felt, but also super dense, like coming down and being shoved into a tuna can, you know, like a fish can. And it was incredibly jarring, but I just strove not to fight it. And okay, so one of the things I had asked before in the review process was I had asked to have a small amount of memory this time. I said, I don't want to forget everything. I want to have just a tiny little amount of memory, just a tiny little bit, you know, and they said I could do that. They had said that I could do that, but it would make it more challenging. It would make this life more difficult because the contrast would be even greater. And at the time I knew that even that contrast was like all contrast, an opportunity for growth. So I accepted. So anyway, as the veil came over me now, I was feeling this, and there was like this little window open that I surmise, I don't know for certain, but I think had to do with that request, because I had this like little window open that was not veiled all the way. And I remember like holding on for a super long time and being like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And sending a signal back through the window, did it take, back to the technicians, and then sending one signal back, yes. So I knew that the veil had been successfully applied, and so I allowed myself to be in the womb in peace for a while. So then I was there for a while, okay, and it was all good. And then eventually I said, I'm not doing this. This is like once again, the darkness and the cutoffness and the lack of connectedness. And I was like, I'm not doing this again. So again, I reached this point where I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is just so ridiculous. So at that moment, I began to summon my energy again so that I could fight my way out again. But as that happened, I had this very humbling moment, and it's like the most holy, precious memory for me. But I remember the Spirit of God coming to me and showing me that I was still, well, showing me what I was still all that is. It showed me the stars and the solar system, and I remember feeling the churning of the sun and the joy of that, and knowing that it was still me. And the Spirit said to me, "This is still what you are. You can never not be this." It's the most holy thing for me to remember, because that's what we really are. That's what all of us really are. And so it's very hard to remember that now, because I feel deep in the human experience right now. I'm not close to there right now. I'm deep in the weeds. But at the time, it calmed me a lot, and it made me relax. And I was like, oh, good. Oh, that's good. I'm still that's good. So then I relaxed. And as I did that, I just was able to let go and experience the relatively simple experience of being in the womb. Okay, so then the next memory is the day I was born. I remember the day I was born. I remember just one visual image of the room after I was out, and I remember seeing the layout of the room. And then when I was older, I drew the room from my mother, and I said, "You were here. The bed was here. Here was the window. Here was the heating grate. Here was the doctor." And she said I was right, which I knew I would be. But beside the visual memory, that wasn't the most important memory. The most important memory was just like the experience, the shock. There was no context yet. Like I had no intellectual context whatsoever. I was like a clean slate. So it was just sense data and stuff going on. There was cold and shock and light and touching and very intense sense data. And I remember being intensely curious and looking around and being like, what is this place? Where am I? And looking at these beings who are taking care of me or doing whatever they're doing, and being in awe of them and actually feeling love for them. And actually, it's funny, because just last week I was talking to my father about this memory. And he said, that's interesting. He said, because the day you were born, your eyes were wide open. And he said, you were looking at everything with such an intenseness and an intense curiosity. And he said he couldn't believe that such a young baby could have such an intense, curiosity. And I remember that. I remember being like, what is this? So after that, I don't have any memory for years after that first day. I mean, I have some very vague memories of looking up at my crib, looking up at the dangly thing that's supposed to get my attention, and being happy when my mother came to get me, and some brief memories like that. But when I got older, I remember being like, 2 or 3, and just assuming everybody knew that we weren't really from here. This was just a neat experience, and a neat place we came to have an experience. And I assumed that many things in the other realities would be true here. And the example I mentioned in the other video was, I remember assuming that we could feel each other's emotions here, because in other reality systems, you just share feelings and information, and it's all telepathic, and it's just an open channel. So I remember being in a diaper one day, and my parents had a friend over who was a neighbor. And I remember that my father had a record on the record player, and he was playing a song I really liked. And I remember dancing to the song and feeling really funky and shaking my little tush in my diaper and saying to the neighbor, watch me dance, because I wanted her to feel what I was feeling. And she walked away unimpressed. And I remember this like dawning on me, like, she can't feel what I'm feeling. Like, what is going on? Like, what is this place where we can't feel each other's emotions. Like, what the heck is going on? It was just so foreign. And I had other assumptions that I thought would be true here. And even to this day, I feel like there's certain things about this world that, I mean, I just don't get. Like, it's just not normal. Certain things that happen here are just not where we're typically used to being. Like, another example I like to use is like, I assumed that people who were in positions of authority or power were loving and wise beings, because in other reality systems, the powerful, I want to use the word positions, but beings who are in roles of authority or helpfulness, they're loving and wise. So I assumed that to be true here. Like, if you were teaching a classroom, you must be a loving and wise being. And if you were like the mayor of a city, you must be even more loving and wise. And if you're the president of the United States, you must be the most loving and wise person. Well, that's not how it works on Earth. That's not how it happens. So eventually, like I said, the memories passed. And I had no memory of that at all until I was 30. And then this began to return to me. And as it did, there's been moments of curiosity where I'll go to a memory and be like, oh, what else? And I just get this nudge like, no, you don't need to know anything else. And there's a reason that the veil is, because the veil, I'm very thankful that I'm veiled, because even having a tiny glimmer is just, it can be very painful. So that's a summary. It's really hard to talk about these things because they're way bigger than anything words can say. And we like to think of things from the human perspective. So we like to think in terms of objects and events and places and what did that look like? And where did you go? And yeah, but the whole physical universe that we're in right here is something of a virtual reality. It's something of it's occurring within our consciousness itself that pre-existed and will exist after the constraints of this physical experience are done. So that being said, that those reality systems and those experiences, they're just so transcendent by comparison next to what we can possibly say here.